This converted packing case was the original headquarters of the Jersey Surfboard Club, formed by a few enthusiasts in 1959 and now the oldest surf club in Europe. In the 60s, the new sport enhanced Jersey's holiday resort reputation as sun-bronzed young men rode the Atlantic rollers of the St. Juan's Beach Break. 1969 saw the heyday of Jersey surfing when 19-year-old Penny Plummer, a Sydney librarian, Australian surf fanatic and reigning Miss World, presented the prizes as the island hosted the European Surf Championships. Jersey's most successful surfer, Gordon Burgess, took the title in front of a 20,000-strong crowd that lined the sea wall. Unsuccessful that year was another renowned Jersey surf star, Steve Harewood. Some 10 years previously, South African lifeguards employed at St. Juan's had pioneered surf riding in United Kingdom waters. In 1969, Steve Harewood was to turn the sport into his career.
Well, these South African guys came over and they worked for Harry Swanson as beach guards down the water splash to make the beach a bit safer for bathing. And they saw the surf and they thought it was really good, and they had sent home for a couple of surfboards. And my old man and my brother, who was a bit older than me, saw them and they decided, well, they looked pretty exciting. So they couldn't buy surfboards then, so they decided to make a couple themselves. And they started surfing. I was pretty small then, but it looked pretty good to me and I had a go. My first experience was the board. There were really big boards in those days, about 14 foot long, and the board hit me on the head, so I gave it up for a while. But boards began to get, started being made out of fiberglass, and they got shorter. And I had another go a couple of years later, and it seemed I was quite good at it. I picked it up quite easy, and I really enjoyed it. After I first started surfing properly, as I said, on a smaller board, 9 foot actually, first competition was about 4 or 5 months afterwards. I worked for the States of Jersey as a telecommunications technician, which is fairly interesting, but the working hours are very restrictive. And it ended up I got a free trip to Puerto Rico to represent Great Britain in the World Contest. And for some reason they wouldn't give me the time off work to go. So I decided to leave. And being honest, I used to hate working for, I used to hate being bossed around by people actually. I couldn't stand it. I used to like to do what I wanted when I wanted. We had 3 Jersey people in the team, and there was Gordon Burgess and Barry Jenkins and myself, and Dave Grimshaw was manager actually from Jersey as well, because Jersey was really at the forefront of surfing in those days. And I think the other people had commitments, so they had to come back home after the championships. But as I said, I'd already left my work job. And I really loved it. I just loved the lifestyle, the sun, the surf, the freedom, really, the freedom of it all. So I met quite a lot of people, made some really good friends who lived in California, and they invited me back to California to stay with them for a few months. So I jumped at the chance and went over, and I stayed there 6 months. I worked in the surfboard factory part of the time to get a bit of food money and things like that. Surfed as much as I could, but eventually had to come back to Jersey because well, you only had a 6-month tourist visa and not allowed to stay over there that long.
What was the atmosphere over there? These would have been in the late 60s, the flower power, the hippie era. What was the scene in Puerto Rico and in California?
It was fantastic, really. There's a lot of optimism, a lot of young people who were just very vibrant, just really enjoying life for what it was, just really. It's completely different to Jersey, which is very conservative. It was just like, and there's so much experience to be had, and everyone was just really seemed to be enjoying themselves. Surfing was a big. California then was at the forefront of surfing. All the designs were coming from California. Californian surfers were the best in the world. And I just loved it. I just enjoyed it. When I came back, I mean, after living a really free lifestyle in California, I couldn't I couldn't envisage working a normal job anymore. I mean, it just sort of, I'd hate it, you know, I wouldn't enjoy living. Working a normal, boring 9-to-5 job. I just couldn't handle it. So I had no actual plans what I would do, but I made a couple of surfboards for myself in my mum's garage. And a couple of good friends of mine tried them out and wanted to buy them. So I made a couple more for myself to replace those, and then a couple more people wanted to buy them. The garage is very small, so I rented a little garage down Le Pulland and made a few more. And I mean, the boards are incredibly cheap in those days. I mean, they were 40 pounds. But it just gave me enough money to give my mum a bit of food money, and I didn't have to go to work, which I really enjoyed. I enjoyed making boards and working on them. I enjoyed surfing, and I was quite happy. Barry, who I went to Puerto Rico with in the World Championship, was a good surfer. And he saw that my boards were quite good, obviously. The designs were good and people wanted them, and I couldn't satisfy the demand. And he thought it'd be commercially viable to start a company of making these boards. And we could sell them in England and France and Europe, because the designs I was doing was more advanced than all the companies in England, because I'd come straight from California with the latest designs. And my boards were 2 years ahead of anyone else's. And I said, okay, go ahead, you know, I'll make the boards, you set it all up, you borrow the money, you handle all the business side of it, because I didn't want to know about the business side of it. You handle that, I'll make the boards, shape them, you sell them, you take the money, and we'll see how it goes. So I went back to California that winter to learn some of the sort of more professional details of making boards, because my designs were good, but the technical sort of parts of the construction I still wasn't 100% sure of. And I went back and I worked again at Dewey Weber, who was the biggest manufacturer of surfboards in the world at the time. They used to make 60 boards a day. It was an incredible factory. I mean, just unbelievable. 60 boards a day. And while I was there, because I knew I was going to make more boards in Jersey, I sort of looked much more in depth at the processes of actual manufacturing, as well as the new designs. And I came back, and Barry had found some bigger premises in Jersey, borrowed some money, and we bought some materials, and we started making boards on a bigger scale than what was actually needed in Jersey. You know, we started exporting our boards to England and France. And that's how Freedom started.
This charming rural scene of Jersey cows gently munching grass, granite farmhouses and narrow lanes is an unlikely location for a progressive surfboard factory. But since 1973, the Freedom factory has produced thousands of customised performance boards for the European market, and more recently glass fibre hulls for sailboards. It's a small operation with a maximum output of 6 boards a day, but the factory team handle every aspect of production, from making expanded polystyrene board blanks to the delivery of the gleaming, hand-polished, custom-painted, fibre-laminated and individually shaped product.
Some of our boards, especially in the early days, weren't built that well technically, but because they performed really well in waves, Freedom had a really good name. And, you know, I've shaped 3, 4, 5, I don't know, don't count them, 5,000 boards. And even now, I sort of, you study it, and you can't actually put your finger on exactly what makes a good board. I mean, some boards are good, then you get that magic board, something that's really magical about it. And it's almost impossible to copy it. I mean, it looks exactly the same, the dimensions are exactly the same, and yet it doesn't quite feel the same under your feet. And I think one of the reasons why Freedom have been really successful is because we make a higher percentage of those magical boards than anyone else. And it's something mystical, it's something that you get a feel for when you're a shaper, but certain shapers can just make those that type of board. That's what I call a magical board.
The other shaper at the factory, equally capable of turning out a magical board, is Jersey surfer Bob Mail. Bob's the only man to have won the British Surf Championships at junior, senior and masters level, and his travels have taken him round the best wave breaks in the world, establishing him as Britain's hottest tube rider.
I just wanted to get involved with working with surfboards, and so Steve had me doing a few odd jobs around the factory, and it just sort of developed from that. As Steve got more and more into the surfboard factory and as it developed, so my involvement in it grew as well, until now when I'm a full-time shaper up there. The factory provides me with an income, but I've always been far more interested in surfing and just generally doing the things that I like to do. And, well, freedom has enabled me to do that, because just the way that we work up there, it gives me a lot of free time, and it gives me at least 3 months off every winter. And that provides me with an ideal opportunity to travel the world and just go surfing in all different places. My favourite all-time spot, I think, is Burleigh Heads in Australia. And that's purely because it's such a hollow wave. And my surfing has always been very prone towards riding tubes and hollow waves. And so obviously that was the best wave that I found for my particular style of surfing.
Okay. Well, Bob, I'd like to change my board for something that doesn't slip out so much, something a bit more positive.
Where are you going to be surfing this board?
Well, it's basically for Australia.
I think you're going to need a board that's a lot narrower, a much sort of more tapered outline with a narrower tail. And also I found the boards out there, they used to put a little bit of tail lift because the wave is so hollow that you can manoeuvre in that sort of surf.
So a narrower tail would stop it slipping so much, would it?
Are you going to have a thruster again through
Yes,
fins?
yes.
Yeah, well, if we pull in the tail a little bit, make the whole board slightly narrower to accommodate the more powerful waves, and then, well, the rest, thickness, you'll have to tell me what sort of thickness you want and colour design.
By the age of 20, Arlene Maltman had become the Jersey, Great Britain and European ladies surf champion. And even though women's surf riding skills don't yet match the men, Arlene's collection of trophies underline her dedication to a sport which has already taken her to Australia, South Africa and California.
I was 13 years old, just going on to 14, and it was at the end of the season. And I was always intrigued at the surfers out in the water, just little tiny black dots. And I thought, oh, I'd love to have a go at that. And I think my mother thought it was a passing fad. And at one of the local cafes where they have the board hire, I persuaded her to allow me to have a lesson, because I think she was more for the idea of having some kind of tuition rather than just go into it straight away. And I hired an enormous board. It was about 12 feet long. And the instructor took me out, and both of us carrying the board. And I thought, oh, you know, it's a rather cumbersome item. But the longer the board is, the easier it is to stand on. And you have to put your feet this way onto the board. And I stood up first of all like this, so I was rather wobbly, but stood up first time, fell off, but really loved the first sensation of going along the wave.
And you pursued it ever since, but what was the reaction of your friends at school? Because obviously surfing's not really a girl's sport.
No, I didn't know any other girls that actually surfed. And I was just so taken away by surfing. It just began to take over everything I did. I wanted to have pictures of surfing. I wanted to have the latest magazines. And I'd buy the magazines, whereas everyone at school had pictures of all their favourite pop stars all over the wall. I thought I'd love to have a picture of a surfer, you know, a nice picture of a surfer going through a tube. And they weren't too pleased because surfers in hot countries don't have wetsuits on, so obviously there's rather a lot of body exposed, and the headmistress wasn't too keen on the idea of having virtually naked men on the walls. When I first tried to enter a competition in Jersey, they had no separate event for women. It was purely men contests only. And I approached the president of the club and said I would like to enter a competition here which would enable me to represent Jersey in the next Great Britain Championships. They were rather reluctant, I think, to have a separate event, but after a lot of persuasion they agreed, in fact, because the numbers weren't big, 2 or 3 of us, and it does sound a bit farcical. But it's important to have such an event to encourage other women, because some other women might not have the courage to ask, you know, is there a separate event? So once an event is established, it changes the whole face of women surfing in Jersey.
Conditions in Jersey aren't obviously ideal all the year round, but do you find that really irrespective of the weather, shall we say, that you keep up a certain level of training and practice over here in Jersey?
I think, well, from my own experience, I've been away one winter in Tenerife, and after surfing in warm water, I was amazed. I felt so stiff because of the actual thickness of the wetsuit and the weight of the wetsuit gloves, and trying to paddle and actually pushing through the waves, and the temperature on your face is just unbearable, sort of an ice cream type headache. It's very hard to improve in that situation, but I think people would disagree with me. Some people believe that it's a good toughening up process to actually surf in cold water. I know very many people do surf well in winter temperatures, but I think if you actually try to go away, you can appreciate the difference and realise that the only way to improve is to have ideal conditions, warm weather, and good surf. I mean, it's a known fact that the colder your body is, the more difficult it is to manoeuvre.
But the winter conditions soon give way to spring sunshine, and although Steve Harewood is an all-year-round surfer, the warmer weather brings the Harewood family onto the beach. Steve's wife Penny plays board caddy to 7-year-old Benji, who uses a plastic Taiwanese board in preference to one of his father's more expensive models. Out to sea, the Jersey surf is living up to its reputation. This section of the St. Juan break produces the most hollow waves and is known as secrets, in a deliberate attempt to obscure its location and allow the local surfers to carve their signatures on the ocean with little interference from visiting wave riders. In the gentler white water, young Benji exercises his talents, ready to follow the Harewood surfing tradition further out in the swell. But as new Harewood surfing skill develops in the water, a new Harewood business venture takes shape ashore.
I missed the opening the first day with a black eye from across. Whoa! Here we go. Well, I suppose this means we're officially open, is it?
This is the opening of freedom then, eh?
The opening of freedom.
At last, at last.
Go for it, eh?
Right, yeah.
Right. Cheers.
Steve's new retail outlet for the factory finally fulfilled his dream of establishing a California-style surf shop in his native island. But even with financial support from a new business partner, Steve knows only too well that you can't keep making money out of surfing without putting some back. So Steve organised Jersey's first Pro-Am surf tournament. Britain's top surfers turned up to perform, and so did the